The dust hung thick in the air as the auctioneer's gavel rose above the crowd in Glenrio, New Mexico Territory, 1876. Zachary Monroe's weathered fingers tightened around his rifle when he spotted her, a young, pregnant woman standing on the auction block, her wrists bound with coarse rope, her eyes downcast as men shouted their bids. The auctioneer's voice cut through the murmur of the crowd like a knife. Next item for sale, female slave, age 22 with child. Bidding starts at $50. Amidst the sea of dusty hats and tobacco-stained beards, the woman trembled. She wore a tattered dress that stretched tightly across her swollen belly, her dark hair falling in tangled waves over her shoulders. Despite her condition, she stood tall, a quiet dignity about her that made Zachary's heart twist painfully in his chest. $60. A man with yellowed teeth and whiskey on his breath raised his hand. $70. Another voice called out. The bidding continued, each amount making the woman flinch as if she were being physically struck. Zachary had come to town for supplies, not to witness the sale of human flesh. Slavery had been abolished over a decade ago, but in these remote territories, the law was whatever the most powerful men said it was, $120. The auctioneer called out, going once. Something inside Zachary snapped. Before he could reconsider, he stepped forward. $240, he shouted, his voice ringing clear across the square. I'll pay double for her freedom. A hush fell over the crowd as all eyes turned to him. The auctioneer looked startled, his gavel frozen mid-air. Sir. You heard me, Zachary said, stepping closer to the platform. $240, and she walks away a free woman. The auctioneer's face contorted in confusion. Mr. Monroe, we don't sell freedom here, we sell property. Zachary reached into his pocket and pulled out a leather pouch. He tossed it onto the platform, coins spilling out with a metallic clatter. There's your money. Now cut her loose. The pregnant woman lifted her gaze for the first time, her dark eyes locking with Zachary's. There was no gratitude there, only wariness and a flash of something that might have been hope, quickly extinguished. This ain't how things are done around here, Monroe, a voice called from the crowd. It belonged to Jeremiah Blackwell, one of the wealthiest ranchers in the territory. You can't just come in, and I believe I can, Zachary interrupted, his hand casually resting on the handle of his Colt. Unless you want to explain to the federal marshals why you're selling human beings 11 years after the war ended. A tense silence fell over the crowd. The law might be distant in Glenrio, but it wasn't non-existent. Even Blackwell knew that. The auctioneer cleared his throat. Sold to Mr. Monroe for $240. He brought the gavel down with a crack that echoed across the square. As the woman was led down from the platform, Zachary stepped forward. What's your name? He asked softly so only she could hear. She hesitated, her eyes still wary. Zara Patterson. Well, Zara Patterson, you're free now. You can go wherever you want. Her hands instinctively moved to her belly. There's nowhere for me to go, she whispered. Zachary nodded, understanding the impossible situation she was in. A pregnant woman alone in the New Mexico Territory had few options, none of them good. I have a ranch about a day's ride from here, he said. You can stay there until the baby comes. After that, you decide what you want to do. She studied him with those dark, cautious eyes. Why are you helping me? Zachary couldn't give her the full truth that something about her had stirred memories of his own mother, sold away when he was just a boy, before the war changed everything. That he'd spent years searching for her, only to find her grave in a forgotten cemetery in Missouri. Because it's the right thing to do, he said instead, and there's precious little of that happening around here. After a moment, Zara nodded. There was no trust in her eyes, but there was acceptance. It was enough for now. The journey to Zachary's ranch was long and silent. He led the way on his stallion, Thunder, while Zara rode the mare he'd purchased before leaving town. She sat stiffly in the saddle, her discomfort evident, but she never complained. As they rode through the rugged landscape, Zachary found himself sneaking glances at her. She was beautiful, even in her worn dress, with high cheekbones and full lips that remained set in a determined line. Her pregnancy was advanced, perhaps 7 or 8 months along, but she managed the ride with stoic endurance. How long were you? He trailed off, unsure how to phrase the question. Property, she finished for him, her voice bitter. Since I was 16. Before that, I was free, living with my parents in Kansas. They were killed when raiders came through our town. I was taken. Zachary's jaw tightened. I'm sorry. Your sorrow doesn't change anything, she said flatly. No, he agreed. It doesn't. They rode in silence for another hour before Zachary spoke again. The baby's father was my last owner, she said, cutting him off. He got bored with me when I started showing. Sold me to a trader who brought me to your town. The matter-of-fact way she said it made Zachary's blood boil, but he kept his face neutral. She didn't need his anger or his pity. By late afternoon, they crested a hill, and the ranch came into view. It wasn't large, a modest main house, a barn and a few outbuildings spread across a valley with a creek running through it. A small herd of cattle grazed in the distance. This is it, Zachary said. Cross Creek Ranch. Zara took in the sight with an unreadable expression. You live here alone. Just me and about 50 head of cattle, he confirmed. And Rufus, my dog, you'll meet him soon enough. As they approached the house, a large black and tan shepherd mix came bounding toward them, barking enthusiastically. Zachary dismounted and greeted the dog with a scratch behind the ears before turning to help Zara down from her horse. She flinched when his hands touched her waist, but allowed him to assist her. Her legs nearly buckled when she hit the ground, and Zachary steadied her with a gentle grip on her elbow. Sorry, she murmured, pulling away as soon as she was stable. It's been a long ride. You need rest, Zachary said, leading the horses toward the barn. Come inside when you're ready. I'll show you where you'll be staying. The interior of the ranch house was simple but clean. A main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen area, and 2 bedrooms off to the side. Zachary showed Zara to the smaller of the 2 rooms. This was meant to be a guest room, he explained, though I can't say I've had many guests. The bed's comfortable enough. Zara stood in the doorway, surveying the room with wary eyes. And where will you sleep? My room's across the hall. The door has a lock if that makes you feel safer. She nodded, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. Thank you. I'll start on dinner, Zachary said, turning to leave. You should rest, you've had a hard day. Mr. Monroe, Zara called after him. When he turned back, she met his gaze directly for the first time. I don't know why you bought me, but I want to be clear I won't be anyone's property again, not even yours. Zachary held her gaze steadily. I didn't buy you, Miss Patterson. I bought your freedom. There's a difference. He left her to settle in, hoping she would come to believe him in time. The first week at Cross Creek Ranch passed in an uneasy rhythm. Zara kept to herself, emerging from her room only for meals and brief walks around the property. She watched Zachary with guarded eyes, as if waiting for him to reveal his true intentions. For his part, Zachary gave her space. He went about his ranch work during the day and spent evenings in the main room, reading by the fire or carving small wooden figures, a hobby that helped pass the long winter nights. On the 8th day, Zachary returned from checking the herd to find Zara in the kitchen, stirring something that smelled like stew in the iron pot over the fire. You didn't have to cook, he said, hanging his hat on a hook by the door. I've been eating your food for a week without contributing, she replied without looking up. I thought it was time I earned my keep. You don't need to earn anything, Zachary said, but he could see from the set of her shoulders that she wasn't interested in his reassurances. The stew was good, better than anything Zachary had made in years. They ate in what had become their customary silence, but something had shifted. When Zachary complimented the meal, Zara offered him a small, tentative smile. My mother taught me to cook, she said. She could make something delicious out of almost nothing. It was the first personal information she had volunteered, and Zachary treasured it like a gift. My mother was the same way, he said. I was young when she was taken from us, but I remember her biscuits, light as air. Zara studied him with curious eyes. Taken? Zachary hesitated, then nodded. We lived in Missouri. My father was a freedman who'd bought his own liberty before the war, then worked to buy my mother's. But he died before he could finish paying. The owner sold her south, separated us. I was 8. What happened to you? A family of abolitionists took me in, raised me, educated me, good people. And your mother, Zachary's face darkened. I found her grave after the war, yellow fever, they said. Zara was silent for a long moment. I'm sorry, she finally said, echoing his words from the journey to the ranch. He looked up, meeting her eyes. Your sorrow doesn't change anything, he said, but there was no bitterness in his voice, only a sad understanding. For the first time since they'd met, Zara's guard seemed to lower slightly. No, she agreed softly. It doesn't. As the weeks passed, a tentative trust began to form between them. Zara took over more of the household tasks, not because Zachary asked her to, but because it gave her purpose. Her pregnancy advanced, her belly growing rounder, her movements slower. Sometimes, Zachary would catch her standing by the window, hands cradling her stomach, a mixture of fear and wonder on her face. One evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Zachary gathered his courage to ask the question that had been on his mind. Have you thought about what you'll do after the baby comes? Zara's hands stilled in her lap. Every day, she admitted, but I don't have many options. You could stay here, Zachary said, the words coming out before he could consider them fully. Until you figure things out, I mean. She looked at him with those penetrating eyes. And what would you want in return? Nothing, he said firmly. The ranch is big enough for both of us. The baby too, Zara shook her head slowly. No one does something for nothing, Mr. Monroe. Zachary, he corrected gently. And some people do. The family that took me in after my mother was sold, they asked for nothing in return. Then they were rare people indeed. Yes, he agreed. They were. The conversation was interrupted by a sharp intake of breath from Zara. Her hands flew to her belly, her face contorting in pain. Zachary was on his feet immediately. What is it? The baby, she nodded, her breath coming in short gasps. I think it's time. Fear gripped Zachary's heart. The nearest doctor was in Glen Rio, a day's ride away, too far. I'll fetch Mrs. Ramirez from the neighboring ranch, he said, already moving toward the door. She's helped deliver babies before. There's no time, Zara gasped, clutching the edge of her chair. This isn't my first pain today. I didn't say anything because I wasn't sure, but now I am. The baby is coming fast. Zachary stood frozen, panic threatening to overwhelm him. I don't know how to deliver a baby. Then you'll learn, Zara said through gritted teeth. Because this child isn't waiting. The next hours were a blur of fear, pain, and determination. Zachary followed Zara's instructions, bringing clean cloths, water, and the knife she told him to boil. She directed him as best she could between contractions, drawing on knowledge passed down from mother to daughter. When the final moment came, Zara's scream tore through the quiet ranch house. Zachary held her hand, murmuring encouragement as she pushed with all her strength. And then, suddenly, a new sound filled the room, the indignant cry of a newborn taking its first breath. A boy, Zachary whispered, awe in his voice as he wrapped the tiny red infant in a clean cloth. You have a son, Zara. Tears streamed down her face as she reached for the child. When Zachary placed the bundle in her arms, something in Zara's expression transformed. The wariness that had been her constant companion since he'd met her melted away, replaced by a fierce, protective love. Hello, little one, she whispered, touching the baby's cheek with a gentle finger. I'm your mama. Zachary watched them, his chest tight with emotions he couldn't name. In that moment, he knew that whatever happened next, his life had changed irrevocably. Zara named the baby Samuel after her father. In the days that followed his birth, the atmosphere in the ranch house shifted. There was a softness to Zara now when she looked at her son, a joy that couldn't be contained. And slowly, that softness began to extend to Zachary as well. He found himself drawn to the infant, marveling at tiny fingers and the perfect curve of his ears. One evening, when Samuel was fussing and Zara looked exhausted, Zachary offered to hold him. To his surprise, she handed the baby over without hesitation. Samuel quieted almost immediately in Zachary's arms, his dark eyes staring up with what seemed like curiosity. He likes you, Zara said, watching them with a small smile. He's a good judge of character, Zachary replied, gently rocking the infant. Aren't you, little man? As spring turned to summer, they fell into a new routine. Zachary continued his ranch work while Zara cared for Samuel and tended to the house. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch, watching the sunset over the distant mountains. Sometimes they talked about their childhoods, about the war that had changed the country, about their hopes for the future. Other times they sat in comfortable silence, the baby sleeping peacefully between them. It was during one of these quiet evenings that Zara finally asked the question that had been on her mind for months. "Why did you really do it, Zachary? Why did you pay for my freedom?" Zachary looked out at the darkening landscape, considering his answer carefully. "I told you it was the right thing to do. There's more to it than that," she pressed gently. "Other men saw me on that auction block. None of them felt compelled to do the right thing." He was silent for a long moment. "When I saw you standing there," he finally said, "I saw my mother. And all the others who had no one to speak for them." He turned to look at her. "But it was also something about you, specifically, the way you held yourself with such dignity despite everything. I couldn't ride away and leave you there." Zara's eyes shimmered in the fading light. "Thank you," she whispered. "Not just for buying my freedom, but for giving me a place where Samuel can grow up safe." Zachary's heart tightened in his chest. "You're welcome to stay as long as you want, both of you." Something unspoken passed between them in that moment, a recognition of feelings that had been growing slowly, tentatively, over the months they had shared a home. Later that night, after Zara had gone to bed, Zachary sat by the fire, thinking about the future. He had never expected to feel this way about anyone, let alone a woman who had come into his life under such unusual circumstances. But there was no denying the truth. He was falling in love with Zara Patterson. The question was whether she could ever see him as more than the man who had bought her freedom. Summer faded into autumn, bringing cooler nights and golden days. Samuel grew stronger, his personality emerging stubborn like his mother, with a laugh that could light up the darkest room. Zachary found himself reorganizing his day just to spend more time with the baby, teaching him things even though he was too young to understand. One crisp October morning, Zachary was chopping wood while Zara hung laundry nearby, Samuel sleeping in a basket at her feet. The domestic scene filled him with contentment he had never thought possible. "I was thinking," he said, setting down the axe, "about expanding the herd next spring, maybe building another room onto the house." Zara looked up from her task. "Oh." "Samuel will need his own room eventually," Zachary explained, suddenly feeling awkward. "And I thought you might like a proper sitting room, somewhere to read or so when the weather's bad." A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. "You're planning for us to stay then?" "I'm hoping you will," he admitted, "but only if that's what you want." Zara was quiet for a moment, smoothing a shirt on the line. "When I first came here, I thought you wanted what every other man had wanted from me," she said softly. "I waited for you to make demands, to show your true intentions, but you never did." "I never would," Zachary said firmly. "I know that now." She turned to face him fully. "These past months, you've shown me what a good man looks like. You've been kind to me and to Samuel, asking nothing in return." Zachary's heart hammered in his chest. "Zara, let me finish," she said gently. "I've been thinking a lot about the future too, about what I want for Samuel and for myself." She took a deep breath. "I want to stay, Zachary. Not out of gratitude or necessity, but because this feels like home now. You feel like home." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning. Zachary crossed the distance between them slowly, giving her time to step back if she wanted. She didn't. When he stood before her, close enough to see the flecks of gold in her dark eyes, he spoke from his heart. "I never expected to find you, Zara Patterson, but now that I have, I don't want to lose you, or Samuel." "You won't," she whispered. "We're not going anywhere." Zachary lifted his hand, hesitantly touching her cheek. When she leaned into his touch, something broke open inside him. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he lowered his head and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle, questioning, but Zara responded with unexpected fervor, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing heavily. "I've wanted to do that for a long time," Zachary admitted, his forehead resting against hers. "So have I," she confessed with a small laugh. "I just wasn't sure you felt the same way." "I do," he assured her. "I love you, Zara. You and Samuel both." Tears filled her eyes. "I love you too." From the basket at their feet, Samuel chose that moment to wake up, his cries demanding attention. They both laughed, the tension of the moment broken. "He has perfect timing," Zachary said as Zara bent to pick up the baby. "He gets that from me," she replied with a smile that made his heart soar. The following weeks were the happiest of Zachary's life. He and Zara moved cautiously into their new relationship, learning each other's boundaries, building trust day by day. Samuel thrived under their combined care, growing stronger and more alert with each passing day. Word of their arrangement had spread to neighboring ranches, bringing mixed reactions. Some, like the Ramirez family, accepted them without question. Others were less charitable in their judgments, particularly when they realized the nature of Zachary and Zara's relationship. One afternoon in late November, Zachary rode to Glenrio for supplies. As he loaded his purchases into his saddlebags, a familiar voice called out to him. "Monroe, heard you're playing house with that slave woman you bought." Zachary turned to find Jeremiah Blackwell standing behind him, flanked by two of his ranch hands. "She's not a slave, Blackwell, and what goes on at my ranch is my business." Blackwell spat tobacco juice onto the street. "It's everyone's business when a man takes up with a colored woman." Sets a bad example. "The only bad example I see is a man who thinks it's still legal to sell human beings," Zachary replied evenly, though his hand drifted toward his gun. "You watch yourself, Monroe," Blackwell warned. "Not everyone around here is as accepting as you think. There are ways to deal with men who don't know their place." The threat hung in the air as Blackwell and his men walked away. Zachary stood rooted to the spot, cold fear replacing his anger. He had been so caught up in his happiness with Zara and Samuel that he'd forgotten how dangerous the world could be for people like them. He rode home faster than usual, anxiety spurring him on. When he arrived, the sight of smoke rising from the chimney and Zara's silhouette in the window eased his immediate fears, but the encounter with Blackwell had shaken him. That night, after Samuel was asleep, Zachary told Zara about the confrontation. Her face paled, but she didn't seem surprised. "I've been waiting for something like this," she admitted. "People don't just accept what they don't understand." "We could leave," Zachary suggested. "Sell the ranch, move somewhere more accepting. Maybe California or up to Colorado." Zara shook her head firmly. "This is our home. I won't be driven away by fear again." She took his hand, her grip strong and sure. "We'll face whatever comes together." Zachary pulled her into his arms, drawing strength from her courage. "Together," he agreed. The weeks passed without incident, and Zachary began to hope that Blackwell's threats had been empty. Christmas approached, bringing with it preparations for Samuel's first holiday. Zachary cut a small pine tree from the northern part of his property and set it up in the main room. Zara decorated it with paper ornaments she had crafted during Samuel's nap times. On Christmas Eve, they sat by the fire, Samuel sleeping peacefully in his cradle nearby. Outside, snow had begun to fall, dusting the landscape in white. "I have something for you," Zachary said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small wooden box and handed it to Zara. She opened it with curious fingers, gasping when she saw the contents. A simple gold ring nestled on a bed of cotton. "Zachary, it was my mother's," he explained. "The only thing I have left of her. The family who took me and saved it for me." He took a deep breath. "Zara Patterson, will you marry me? Be my wife. Let me be Samuel's father in every way that matters." Tears spilled down Zara's cheeks as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." Zachary slipped the ring onto her finger, his heart so full it felt like it might burst. "I promise to spend every day making you and Samuel happy." "You already do," she said, leaning forward to kiss him. They were interrupted by the sound of hooves outside. Zachary tensed, moving to the window to peer out into the snowy night. 3 riders were approaching the house, their figures dark against the white ground. "Stay here," he told Zara, reaching for his rifle. "Zachary, just stay with Samuel," he insisted, heading for the door. Outside, the cold air bit at his face as he stepped onto the porch, rifle ready. "That's far enough," he called to the approaching riders. "State your business." "It's Pastor Miller, Mr. Monroe," a voice called back. "From the church in Glenrio, I've brought Dr. Collins and Mr. Henderson with me." Zachary lowered his rifle slightly, but remained wary. "What brings you out on Christmas Eve in a snowstorm, Pastor?" The 3 men pulled up in front of the house, their horses stamping in the fresh snow. Pastor Miller, a thin man with a kind face, spoke first. We heard there was a baby here who hasn't been baptized, he said, and a couple in need of proper marrying. Zachary's suspicion gave way to confusion. Who told you that, Mrs. Ramirez stopped by the church last Sunday, the pastor explained. She was quite insistent that we come before Christmas, weather permitting. Dr. Collins, a gruff older man with a thick beard, added, and I thought I should check on the infant. Babies born in these conditions sometimes need extra care. The third man, Henderson, nodded. I'm the county clerk. If you're going to get married, you'll need someone to witness and record it. Zachary was speechless. Behind him, the door opened and Zara stepped out, Samuel bundled in her arms. You've come all this way to baptize our son and marry us, she asked, her voice filled with wonder. Pastor Miller dismounted, approaching the porch with a gentle smile. The Lord's work doesn't stop for snow, my dear, and every child deserves the blessing of baptism, especially at Christmas time. Zachary found his voice at last. Please come in out of the cold. The next hours were a blur of joy and solemnity. Dr. Collins examined Samuel, pronouncing him healthy and strong. Pastor Miller performed a simple baptism using water from the well, blessing the child as Samuel Alexander Monroe, with Zachary acknowledging him as his son before God and man. Then, with the fire crackling in the hearth and Samuel sleeping peacefully in his cradle, Zachary and Zara stood before the pastor and spoke their vows. Zachary's voice trembled with emotion as he promised to love and cherish Zara for all his days. Tears streamed down her face as she made the same promise in return. When Pastor Miller pronounced them husband and wife, the small group broke into applause. Henderson produced the marriage certificate, which they all signed with flourish. It's official now, the clerk said with a broad smile. Mr. and Mrs. Monroe and young Master Monroe as well. After a celebratory meal of the Christmas stew Zara had prepared, the visitors prepared to leave despite the snow. Zachary offered to let them stay the night, but Pastor Miller shook his head. We've duties in town tomorrow, he explained. And the snow isn't too deep yet. As they mounted their horses, Dr. Collins turned to Zachary. Monroe, you should know Blackwell and his men have been making noise in town. Be careful. Zachary nodded grimly. Thank you for the warning, Doctor. When they were gone, Zachary and Zara stood in the doorway, watching the three figures disappear into the snowy night. Mrs. Monroe, Zachary said, testing the name on his tongue. Zara leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. I like the sound of that. So do I, he replied, kissing the top of her head. They closed the door on the cold night, turning back to the warmth of their home and the sleeping child who completed their family. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The winter months passed in a cocoon of domestic bliss. Zachary and Zara settled into married life with ease, their love growing deeper with each passing day. Samuel thrived under their care, crawling early and babbling constantly, his sunny disposition lighting up the ranch house. Spring brought new calves to the herd and fresh growth to the land. Zachary began the promised expansion of the house, adding a nursery for Samuel and a small sitting room for Zara. She surprised him by asking for a section of land to start a vegetable garden, proving to have as green a thumb as she had claimed. In late April, as the wildflowers bloomed across the New Mexico landscape, they received an unexpected visitor. Zachary was mending a fence when he spotted a rider approaching from the east. He straightened, shading his eyes against the sun, his hand automatically moving to the gun at his hip. As the rider drew closer, Zachary recognized the blue uniform of a U.S. Marshal. He set down his tools and walked to meet the man at the edge of the property. Mr. Monroe, the marshal called as he approached. That's right, Zachary confirmed, still wary. What can I do for you, Marshal? The man dismounted, removing his hat. Marshal James Everett. I'm looking into some reports of illegal slave trading in this territory. Zachary's heart skipped a beat. Slavery's been over for more than a decade, Marshal. That's what the law says, Everett agreed. But I've been tracking a ring of traders moving people through Texas into the territories. Word is there was an auction in Glen Rio last year. Zachary hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. I might have heard something about that. Everett studied him with keen eyes. I also heard that a certain rancher interrupted that auction, paid double for a pregnant woman's freedom. Before Zachary could respond, he heard footsteps behind him. Zara had approached from the house, Samuel balanced on her hip. She stood tall, her chin lifted in the proud way that had first caught Zachary's attention. "That was my husband," she said clearly. "He saved me from being sold to men who would have worked me to death after they took my baby." The marshal's eyes widened slightly at her direct approach. "Madam," he said respectfully, tipping his hat, "I'd like to hear your story if you're willing to tell it. It could help me put some very bad men behind bars." Zachary looked at Zara, letting her make the decision. She nodded firmly. "Come to the house, Marshal Everett. I'll tell you everything I know." Over coffee at the kitchen table, Zara recounted her ordeal being captured in Kansas, passed from owner to owner, finally ending up on the auction block in Glenrio. She described the trader who had brought her there, a man named Harris with a scar across his left cheek, and the local men who had facilitated the auction, including Jeremiah Blackwell. Everett took careful notes, asking occasional questions but mostly letting her speak. When she finished, he looked at her with respect. "You're a brave woman, Mrs. Monroe. Your testimony could be crucial in bringing these men to justice." "Will she have to testify in court?" Zachary asked, concerned. "Eventually, yes," Everett admitted, "but not for some time. I need to gather more evidence, track down other victims. When the time comes, I'll make sure she's protected." Zara reached across the table to take Zachary's hand. "I want to do this," she said firmly, "for all the others who didn't have someone to pay for their freedom." Zachary squeezed her hand, pride swelling in his chest. "Then we'll do it together." After the marshal left, promising to return when he needed Zara's formal testimony, they stood on the porch watching him ride away. "Are you sure about this?" Zachary asked gently. "Blackwell won't take kindly to being named in a federal investigation." Zara bounced Samuel on her hip, the baby giggling at the movement. "I'm sure. For too long, I was afraid to stand up to speak out, not anymore." She turned to look at Zachary, determination in her eyes. "You taught me that, when you stood up at that auction when no one else would." Zachary pulled her and Samuel into his arms, holding them close. "You're the bravest person I know, Zara Monroe." She smiled up at him, the spring sunshine illuminating her face. "We're brave together." The summer of 1877 brought both joy and tension to Cross Creek Ranch. The joy came in the form of Samuel's first birthday, celebrated with a small gathering of friendly neighbors. The Ramirez family came, bringing a hand-carved wooden horse for the boy. Pastor Miller rode out from Glenrio to say a special blessing. Even Dr. Collins made the journey, pronouncing the child fit as a fiddle and twice as noisy. The tension came from increasing hostility from Jeremiah Blackwell and his associates. Marshal Everett's investigation had become common knowledge in the territory, and those implicated in the slave trading were growing desperate. Zachary took to carrying his rifle whenever he worked the far pastures. Zara never went to town alone, and they both kept a watchful eye on Samuel, who was now toddling around the ranch house on unsteady legs. In August, as the summer heat reached its peak, Zachary rode to Glenrio for supplies. The town seemed unusually quiet as he tied his horse outside the general store. Inside, the shopkeeper, Mr. Paulson, greeted him with a nervous nod. "Afternoon, Mr. Monroe. Your usual order." "That's right, Mr. Paulson, and some peppermint sticks if you have them." Samuel's developed quite a taste for them. As Paulson gathered the supplies, he kept glancing toward the door. "You might want to head back to your ranch directly, Mr. Monroe," he said in a low voice. "Blackwell's boys have been drinking at the saloon all afternoon, making threats." Zachary's hand moved instinctively to his gun. "Threats about what?" "About setting things right," they said. "About people who talk to marshals." Paulson's eyes were sympathetic. They rode out about an hour ago, headed east. Cold fear gripped Zachary's heart, east toward his ranch. Toward Zara and Samuel. "Put those supplies aside, Mr. Paulson. I'll get them later." He was already moving toward the door when the shopkeeper called after him. "Monroe, take care." They were 5 or 6 strong, all armed. Zachary rode harder than he ever had, pushing Thunder to his limits. The normally 2-hour journey took just over 1, but even that felt too slow. As he crested the final hill overlooking the ranch, his worst fears were confirmed. Smoke rose from the barn, flames licking at the wooden structure. In the yard, 4 riders circled the house, whooping and shouting. One of them held a torch, threatening to throw it onto the roof. Zachary dismounted, grabbing his rifle. He took aim at the man with the torch and fired. The shot caught the man in the shoulder, sending him tumbling from his horse, the torch falling harmlessly to the ground. The other riders whirled, spotting Zachary on the hillside. They returned fire, bullets kicking up dirt around him. Zachary ran in a zigzag pattern down the hill, firing as he went, forcing the men to scatter. "Zara," he shouted as he reached the yard. "Zara." The front door of the house opened a crack, and Zara's voice called out, "Zachary, we're inside. Samuel's with me." Relief flooded through him, quickly replaced by determination. "Stay down," he called back. "I'm going to drive them off." One of Blackwell's men had circled behind the house. Zachary heard glass breaking and Zara's scream. Without hesitation, he ran toward the sound, rounding the corner just as the man was climbing through a broken window. Zachary fired, the bullet striking the intruder in the leg. The man howled in pain, falling back onto the ground. Before he could recover, Zachary was on him, pressing the rifle barrel against his chest. "Tell your friends to leave," Zachary growled, "or you won't live to see sunset." Fear replaced the hatred in the man's eyes. "Harris, Jenkins," he called out. "Monroe's got me. He's gonna kill me." From around the front of the house, a voice shouted back. "Too bad for you, Parker." Blackwell said no witnesses. A shot rang out, and Parker's eyes went wide with shock. Blood bloomed on his chest where one of his own companions had shot him. Zachary rolled away, just as more bullets thudded into the ground where he had been kneeling. Rage filled him. These men had come to his home, threatened his family, and now were willing to kill their own. He moved along the side of the house, using the shadows for cover. When he reached the corner, he peered around carefully. 2 riders remained in the front yard, their attention focused on the house. The third was nowhere to be seen. Zachary took aim at the closer of the 2 and fired. The man clutched his arm, cursing loudly. "Let's get out of here." He shouted to his companion, "This ain't worth dying for." The 2 turned their horses and galloped away, heading back toward town. Zachary kept his rifle trained on them until they disappeared over the hill. Then he remembered the third man, the one he couldn't see. A scream from inside the house chilled his blood. "Zara!" Zachary burst through the front door, rifle ready. The scene that greeted him would haunt his nightmares for years to come. Zara stood in the center of the room, a kitchen knife in her hand. At her feet lay a man, blood pooling beneath him. In the corner, Samuel was in his cradle, crying loudly. "He came through the back door," Zara said, her voice eerily calm though her hand shook. "He was going for Samuel." Zachary rushed to her side, taking the knife gently from her grip. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head. "He never touched me." Her eyes fixed on the dead man. "I couldn't let him hurt our son." Zachary pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly as the reality of what had happened sank in. "You did what you had to do," he murmured into her hair. "You protected Samuel." They stood like that for a long moment, drawing strength from each other, until Samuel's cries grew more insistent. Zara broke away to go to him, lifting the child into her arms and soothing him with soft words. Zachary knelt beside the dead man, checking for identification. He found nothing except a small pouch of coins and a folded note. Opening it, he read the message. "Take care of Monroe and the woman. No witnesses. JB evidence. Direct evidence linking Blackwell to the attack." Zachary folded the note carefully and tucked it into his pocket. Then he went to check on the barn. The fire had mostly burned itself out, damaging one wall but leaving the structure largely intact. The animals, thankfully, had been in the pasture. When he returned to the house, Zara had cleaned herself up and was sitting in the rocking chair, Samuel dozing in her arms. "We need to go," Zachary said softly. "It's not safe here." Zara looked up at him, her eyes clear and determined despite the trauma she had just endured. "Where?" "To town." "To the sheriff. We have proof now of what Blackwell's been doing." She nodded, rising carefully so as not to wake Samuel. "I'll pack some things for the baby." As Zara gathered necessities for Samuel, Zachary quickly loaded his shotgun and checked his pistol. He wrapped the dead man in a blanket and carried him outside, laying him across the back of his own horse, which had remained in the yard. Within the hour, they were ready to leave. Zachary helped Zara onto Thunder, passing Samuel up to her. Then he mounted the dead man's horse, leading the animal carrying the body. "Ready?" he asked. Zara adjusted Samuel in her arms, her face set with determination. "Ready." The ride to Glenrio was tense, both of them constantly scanning the landscape for signs of Blackwell or his men. But they encountered no one on the trail, arriving in town as the sun was beginning to set. Sheriff Davis was sitting outside his office when they rode up. His eyes widened at the sight of the blanket-wrapped body. "What in tarnation? Blackwell sent men to burn us out," Zachary interrupted. "This one tried to hurt my wife and son." He dismounted, reaching into his pocket for the note. "And I have proof Blackwell ordered it." The sheriff read the note, his expression darkening. "This is serious business, Monroe." "There's more," Zachary said. "This is all tied to the slave trading Marshall Everett's been investigating. Blackwell was trying to silence us before we could testify." Davis's eyes flicked to Zara, who sat straight on Thunder, Samuel cradled protectively against her chest. "You'd both be willing to testify to that?" "We would," Zara confirmed, her voice steady. The sheriff nodded slowly. "All right then. You folks better come inside while I send for Marshall Everett, and I'll get a posse together to bring in Blackwell." The next days were a whirlwind of statements and preparations. Marshall Everett arrived from Santa Fe, bringing with him 2 deputies and a federal prosecutor. Blackwell was arrested, along with the 2 surviving men who had attacked the ranch. The slave trader Harris was already in custody in Texas, Everett informed them, picked up based on information from other victims. "Your testimony will help ensure they all face justice," the marshal told Zara. "But it won't be easy. These men have friends and the trial could take months." Zachary and Zara exchanged a glance. "What do you suggest, Marshal?" Zachary asked. "I can arrange protection for your family," Everett offered, "perhaps in Santa Fe until the trial is over." Zachary thought of their ranch, the home they had built together. Leaving it felt like surrender, but staying might be too dangerous. He looked to Zara for her thoughts. "We won't be driven from our home," she said firmly. "But we need to be smart about this. Maybe we could stay with friends until the immediate danger passes." In the end, they accepted an offer from the Ramirez family to stay at their ranch, which was larger and had several workers who could help keep watch. Marshal Everett assigned a deputy to stay nearby, and Sheriff Davis increased patrols in the area. The weeks that followed were tense, but not unhappy. The Ramirez family welcomed them warmly, especially delighting in Samuel, who charmed everyone with his toddling steps and infectious laugh. Zachary rode to Cross Creek Ranch daily to care for the animals and check on the property. One evening in early October, Zachary returned to the Ramirez ranch later than usual. He found Zara sitting on the porch watching the sunset. Samuel had already been put to bed inside. "Everything all right at home?" she asked as he joined her. "Fine," he assured her, though there was something in his manner that made her study him more closely. "What is it? What aren't you telling me?" Zachary sighed, taking her hand in his. "Marshal Everett stopped by the ranch today. The trial date has been set for December in Santa Fe. We'll need to be there for at least a week, maybe longer." Zara nodded, having expected this news. "And after the trial, what then?" "That depends on the verdict," Zachary admitted. "If Blackwell and the others are convicted, we should be safe to return home permanently. And if they're not?" Zachary's grip tightened on her hand. "Then we'll have decisions to make." Zara was quiet for a moment, watching the sky turn from gold to deep blue. "I've been thinking about that," she said finally. "About what we do if it's not safe to stay here." "What have you been thinking?" "I've been thinking about Colorado," she said, turning to look at him. "About starting fresh somewhere new, somewhere we could build a life without shadows from the past." Zachary considered her words. He loved Cross Creek Ranch, the land he had worked so hard to make his own. But he loved Zara and Samuel more. "If that's what you want, that's what we'll do. Colorado, California, even back east if you prefer." She smiled, leaning against his shoulder. "I just want us to be together, safe and together." "That's all I want too," he assured her, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. 2 months later, they found themselves in Santa Fe for the trial. The city was larger and busier than Glenrio, filled with a mix of Mexican, American, and native influences that fascinated Zara. They stayed in a modest hotel near the courthouse, with the federal government covering the expenses for witnesses in the case. The trial itself was grueling. Zara spent hours on the witness stand, recounting her ordeal in detail. Zachary testified about the auction and the attack on their ranch. Other victims of the slave trading ring gave similar accounts, their stories painting a damning picture of Blackwell and his associates. The defense attorneys tried to discredit Zara's testimony, suggesting she had been a willing participant rather than a victim. Zachary had to be physically restrained when one lawyer implied that Samuel's parentage was in question. But Zara remained composed throughout, her dignity and clear recollections winning over the jury. After a week of testimony and arguments, the jury retired to consider their verdict. Zachary and Zara waited anxiously in their hotel room, Samuel playing on the floor between them, blissfully unaware of the stakes. On the morning of the third day, word came. The jury had reached a decision. They returned to the courthouse, Zara clutching Zachary's hand tightly as they sat in the gallery. The verdicts were read one by one: guilty, guilty, guilty. Blackwell and all his co-conspirators were convicted on charges of kidnapping, illegal trafficking, attempted murder, and numerous other crimes. The judge sentenced them to lengthy prison terms, ensuring they would never again threaten the Monroe family. As they left the courthouse, Marshal Everett approached them. "You did it," he said, shaking Zachary's hand and nodding respectfully to Zara. "Your courage brought down an entire criminal operation." "What happens now?" Zachary asked. "Now you go home," Everett said simply. "Live your lives in peace. You've earned it." That night in their hotel room, Zachary and Zara sat by the window, watching the snow fall gently over Santa Fe. Samuel was asleep in the small bed they had arranged for him, his peaceful breathing the most beautiful sound in the world. "We did it," Zara whispered, echoing the marshal's words. "It's really over." Zachary pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "Yes, it is, and now we have our whole lives ahead of us." Zara lifted her face to his. "I want to go home, Zachary, to our ranch. I don't want to run to Colorado or anywhere else. I want to rebuild what they tried to destroy." Pride and love swelled in Zachary's chest. "Then that's what we'll do." They returned to Cross Creek Ranch just before Christmas of 1877. The house had stood empty for weeks, but neighbors had checked on it periodically, keeping the worst of the weather damage at bay. It took several days of cleaning and repairs before it felt like home again, but they worked together, determination driving them forward. On Christmas Eve, exactly 1 year after their impromptu wedding, they sat before the fire in the main room. Samuel played with the wooden blocks Zachary had carved for him, his laughter filling the house with joy. "I have something to tell you," Zara said softly, taking Zachary's hand and placing it on her stomach. "Samuel is going to have a brother or sister next summer." Zachary's eyes widened, joy spreading across his face. "Truly?" Zara nodded, tears of happiness shining in her eyes. "Truly." He gathered her into his arms, overwhelmed with emotion. From the lowest moment of his life, seeing her on that auction block, bound and afraid to this perfect happiness, their journey had been extraordinary. "I love you, Zara Monroe," he whispered against her hair. "More than I ever thought possible." "And I love you, Zachary Monroe," she replied, her voice steady and sure. "You gave me my freedom, but more than that, you gave me a home." Outside, snow began to fall on Cross Creek Ranch, covering the land in a blanket of white. Inside, wrapped in each other's arms, Zachary and Zara Monroe looked toward the future, a future they had fought for, a future filled with hope and love and family. A future that had seemed impossible that dusty day in Glenrio when a pregnant woman stood on an auction block and a cowboy stepped forward to say, "I'll pay double for her freedom." In the summer of 1878, Zara gave birth to a daughter they named Hope Elizabeth Monroe. Unlike Samuel's dramatic entrance, Hope's arrival was peaceful, attended by both Dr. Collins and a midwife from the Ramirez Ranch. Zachary paced outside the bedroom door until Zara's laughter beckoned him inside to meet his daughter. "She has your eyes," Zara said as she placed the tiny bundle in his trembling hands. "And your strength," Zachary replied, marveling at the perfect little fingers that wrapped around his own. Samuel, now nearly 2 years old, approached the bed cautiously, curious about the new addition to the family. "Baby?" he asked, pointing at his sister. "Yes, Samuel," Zara smiled. "This is Hope, your sister." The boy considered this information solemnly before declaring, "My baby," with all the certainty of a toddler staking his claim. Zachary and Zara exchanged amused glances over the children's heads. Their family was complete now, in this home they had fought so hard to keep. As the years passed, Cross Creek Ranch flourished. Zachary expanded the herd and added horses to their livestock. Zara's garden grew to include not just vegetables but medicinal herbs, which she used to help neighbors with various ailments. Her knowledge, passed down from her mother, combined with remedies she learned from Mrs. Ramirez, made her a respected healer in the area. Samuel grew into a strong, thoughtful boy with his mother's dark eyes and his father's steady demeanor. Hope, with her curly hair and mischievous smile, became the joy of the ranch, charming everyone she met. The children rode their ponies across the property, helped with chores appropriate to their ages, and learned both their letters and the practical skills needed for life in the territory. The scars of the past never fully faded. Sometimes, Zara would wake in the night, her heart racing from nightmares of being sold, of losing her family. Zachary had his own dark dreams of arriving too late at the ranch that day, of finding his family gone or worse. But they found comfort in each other, their love a balm for old wounds. In 1880, Marshal Everett visited the ranch, bringing news that the slave trading network had been completely dismantled, with all major players now behind bars. He also carried an unexpected offer. "The territorial governor has asked me to recommend someone for a new position," Everett explained as they sat at the kitchen table. "He wants to establish a special marshal's office focused on ensuring that the rights of former slaves are protected in the territory." Zachary glanced at Zara, who was listening intently while mending one of Samuel's shirts. "What does that have to do with us?" "I recommended you, Monroe," Everett said directly. "You'd have authority throughout the territory, working directly with my office, but with a specific mandate to investigate cases like what happened to your wife." The offer was unexpected and compelling. Zachary had never considered law enforcement as a career, but the idea of helping others who had suffered as Zara had appealed to him deeply. "I'd need to discuss it with my wife," he said carefully. After Everett left, promising to return in a week for Zachary's answer, Zara and Zachary sat on the porch, watching the children play in the yard. "What are you thinking?" Zachary asked, noting the thoughtful expression on Zara's face. "I'm thinking about all the women who don't have a Zachary Monroe to pay double for their freedom," she said softly. "All the children who are still separated from their parents, despite what the law says." Zachary nodded, understanding her perspective. "If I take this position, I'd be away from home sometimes, maybe for days at a time." "We would manage," Zara assured him. "Samuel is old enough to help more around the ranch, and we could hire one of the Ramirez boys to assist with the heavier work. You truly think I should accept?" Zara turned to face him fully. "I think you were meant for this, Zachary. You have a good heart and a strong sense of justice. You could make a real difference." With Zara's blessing, Zachary accepted the position. He was sworn in as a special marshal for the New Mexico Territory in the autumn of 1880. His jurisdiction covered cases involving the rights of former slaves, illegal trafficking of persons, and related crimes. The work was challenging but deeply satisfying. Zachary traveled throughout the territory, investigating reports of abuse and exploitation. He freed workers held in conditions of virtual slavery on remote ranches, reunited families that had been separated by unscrupulous traders, and brought more than a dozen criminals to justice in his first year alone. When he was home, Zachary treasured every moment with his family. He taught Samuel to track and hunt, skills the boy absorbed eagerly. He sat patiently while Hope practiced reading aloud from her primer, her small finger tracing each word carefully. And he spent quiet evenings with Zara, sharing the day's events as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. Life settled into a new rhythm, different from what they had imagined but fulfilling in ways they hadn't expected. Cross Creek Ranch became known not just as a successful cattle operation, but as a safe haven for those in need. More than once, Zachary brought home individuals or families he had rescued, giving them temporary shelter until more permanent arrangements could be made. Zara never turned anyone away. "We have been blessed," she would say simply. "It's only right that we share those blessings." In the spring of 1882, as they celebrated Samuel's 6th birthday, Zara surprised Zachary with news of another baby on the way. This pregnancy, like hopes, progressed smoothly, resulting in the birth of another son. They named Adam Justice Monroe, a nod to Zachary's work and the principles that guided their family. As their children grew, so did their reputation in the territory. Zachary's position brought them into contact with influential people, including territorial politicians, judges, and business leaders. Some of these connections proved valuable, others merely interesting, but all expanded the family's horizons beyond Cross Creek Ranch. One evening, after the children were in bed, Zachary found Zara writing at the small desk in their sitting room. "What are you working on?" he asked, curious. "A letter to the territorial newspaper," she replied, not looking up from her task. "About the need for a proper school in Glenrio." Zachary smiled, unsurprised by her initiative. Over the years, Zara had become increasingly involved in community matters, particularly those affecting women and children. She had started by teaching their own children to read and write, then extended her efforts to include the children of neighboring ranches. Now, it seemed, she was setting her sights higher. "The town council won't like it," he warned, though his tone held no disapproval. "They've been dragging their feet on funding a school for years." Zara looked up, determination in her eyes. "Then perhaps it's time they faced some public pressure. Every child deserves an education, Zachary, even in Glenrio." He leaned down to kiss her forehead. "I've learned never to bet against you when you've made up your mind, Mrs. Monroe." Her campaign for a school succeeded, though it took nearly 2 years of persistent advocacy. In the autumn of 1884, the Glenrio School opened its doors, with Zara serving on the school board. It was a simple building with one room and a young teacher from back east, but it represented a significant step forward for the growing community. That same year, New Mexico's bid for statehood was again denied by Congress. A disappointment, but not a surprise to those who had followed the territory's long struggle for recognition. The political discussions around the dinner table grew more animated as Samuel, now 8, developed an interest in such matters. "Why won't they let us be a state, Pa?" he asked one evening, his fork paused halfway to his mouth. "It's complicated, son," Zachary replied, considering how to explain the complex interplay of politics, prejudice, and power to a child. "Some people in Washington don't think the territory is ready. Because of people like me and Ma?" Samuel asked perceptively, his young face solemn. Zachary and Zara exchanged a glance, neither wanting to burden their children with the harsh realities of prejudice, but committed to raising them with an understanding of the world they would inherit. "That's part of it," Zachary admitted. "Some people believe that territories with many Mexican citizens or former slaves shouldn't have the same rights as other states." "That's not fair," Hope declared emphatically, her 6-year-old sense of justice offended. "No, it's not," Zara agreed, reaching out to smooth her daughter's curls. "But things are changing slowly, and they'll continue to change because good people stand up for what's right." As the children grew older, such conversations became more common at the Monroe table. Zachary and Zara were determined that their children would understand both the challenges and the opportunities before them. They taught them to take pride in their heritage while preparing them for a world that might not always see their worth. Samuel, in particular, showed a keen interest in his father's work as a special marshal. By the time he was 12, he was begging to accompany Zachary on his less dangerous assignments. After much discussion, Zachary and Zara agreed to let him join his father occasionally, believing the experience would be educational. "Remember," Zachary cautioned as they rode out together for the first time, "your job is to observe and learn, not to get involved." If I tell you to stay back or leave, you do it immediately. No questions, no arguments. Yes, sir, Samuel replied solemnly, sitting tall in his saddle. The assignment was a relatively simple one, delivering legal papers to a ranch where former slaves were reportedly being held as indentured servants long after their contracts should have expired. The ranch owner, seeing the official documentation and noting the determined look in Zachary's eye, chose not to contest the matter. The workers were released from their obligations, free to seek employment elsewhere. On the ride home, Samuel was unusually quiet, processing what he had witnessed. Finally, he spoke. "Pa, why do people do that? Treat others like they're not even human?" It was the question that had haunted Zachary since he'd seen his mother sold away, the question that drove his work as a marshal. "Some do it for money or power," he answered honestly. "But mostly I think it's fear. Fear of people who are different, fear of losing what they have." "But it's wrong," Samuel insisted. "Yes, son, it is. That's why we have to stand against it, even when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult." Samuel nodded, his young face set with determination. "I want to be like you when I grow up, Pa. I want to help people." Zachary felt a surge of pride mixed with concern. He wanted his son to follow his own path, but he also knew the dangers and disappointments that came with challenging established injustice. "There are many ways to help people, Samuel. You have time to figure out yours." As the years passed, the Monroe family continued to grow and evolve. Hope showed a talent for healing like her mother, spending hours learning about herbs and remedies. Adam, their youngest, revealed a gift for working with animals, able to gentle even the most spirited horses by the time he was 10. In 1892, as Samuel prepared to leave for college in Denver, an opportunity that filled his parents with both pride and anxiety, Zachary and Zara celebrated their 15th wedding anniversary. They marked the occasion with a rare trip away from the ranch, traveling to Santa Fe for a week while Hope, now 14, supervised her younger brother with the help of Mrs. Ramirez. In the privacy of their hotel room, Zachary presented Zara with a small box. Inside was a delicate gold locket, open to reveal tiny portraits of their 3 children. "It's beautiful," Zara whispered, tears filling her eyes as she traced the familiar faces. "Turn it over," Zachary urged. On the back, an inscription read, "For Zara, who taught me the true meaning of freedom, all my love, Zachary." She looked up at him, her heart in her eyes. "I never imagined that day in Glenrio that life could be this good." Zachary took her hands in his. "When I saw you on that auction block, something in me knew you were going to change my life. I just had no idea how completely." "We changed each other," Zara corrected gently. "And together, we've changed a small corner of the world." As they embraced, Zachary reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From the desperate act of buying a pregnant woman's freedom to building a family and a legacy of justice in the territory, their lives had been richer and more purposeful than he could have dreamed. In the years that followed, they watched with pride as their children forged their own paths. Samuel graduated from college and returned to New Mexico, eventually following in his father's footsteps by studying law and becoming an advocate for civil rights. Hope married the son of a neighboring rancher but maintained her independence, establishing a small clinic where she practiced her healing arts. Adam took over the management of Cross Creek Ranch, expanding it into one of the most successful operations in the region. When New Mexico finally achieved statehood in 1912, Zachary and Zara attended the celebrations in Santa Fe, their hearts full as they witnessed the culmination of decades of struggle. Though in their 60s now, with gray in their hair and lines of experience on their faces, they stood tall among the crowds, their hands linked as they had been for nearly 35 years. "We made it," Zachary whispered to his wife as the new state flag was raised for the first time. "Yes," Zara agreed, squeezing his hand. Together. That evening, as they sat on the balcony of their hotel room, watching the sunset paint the ancient city in gold and crimson, Zachary reflected on the long, improbable journey that had brought them here. "Do you ever think about that day?" he asked softly. "The auction?" Zara nodded, her eyes distant with memory. "Sometimes, less often now than before." She turned to look at him, love evident in her gaze. I think about how terrified I was, how certain that Samuel and I would suffer terrible fates. And then this stranger stepped forward and said those words that changed everything. I'll pay double for her freedom. Zachary lifted her hand to his lips, kissing it gently. Best money I ever spent. Zara smiled, the same smile that had captivated him all those years ago. It wasn't the money that saved me, Zachary. It was your courage, your willingness to stand up when no one else would. I couldn't have done otherwise, he said simply. Not once I saw you. As the last light faded from the sky, they sat in comfortable silence, surrounded by the sounds of celebration from the streets below. Their life together had not been without challenges, the prejudice they faced as a mixed-race couple, the dangers of Zachary's work, the normal trials of raising children on the frontier. But through it all, their love had remained steady, a beacon guiding them forward. I have no regrets, Zara said suddenly, as if reading his thoughts. Not one. Zachary gathered her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. Nor do I, my love, nor do I. In the years that followed, they watched New Mexico grow and change, their own contributions to its history a source of quiet pride. They welcomed grandchildren, taught them the family stories, and instilled in them the same values of justice, courage, and love that had guided their own lives. When Zachary passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1920, Zara mourned deeply, but found comfort in the legacy they had built together. She lived another 5 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, her final days spent on the porch of Cross Creek Ranch, watching the sunsets over the land that had become her true home. On her deathbed, with Samuel, Hope, and Adam gathered around her, Zara shared a final reflection on the life she had lived. Your father saved me twice, she told them, her voice weak but clear. First when he paid for my freedom, and then when he showed me that love could heal even the deepest wounds. Remember that, my children. Remember that one act of courage can change the course of many lives. She died as she had lived with dignity, surrounded by the family that had begun that dusty day in Glenrio when a pregnant woman stood on an auction block, and a cowboy stepped forward to say, I'll pay double for her freedom. The Monroe family continued to thrive in New Mexico, their story passing into local legend, a testament to the power of love and the enduring human spirit in the face of adversity.